Let's migrate to another important issue in this country. The family silver, the mines. There were developments in for KCM. It was put under liquidation in 2018 because of the huge debt that previous investor Vedanta had accumulated. Mopani, Glencore decided on its own, I think, because of the issues they were facing in London and in the US courts, where they were being pursued for both tax evasion, corruption and bribery and other issues. They decided to decamp from their assets in Zambia, in Namibia, South Africa, and Australia. And they hammered a deal where the Zambian government were to take over absolute ownership through ZCMIH and pay through a debt of, with room of $1.5 billion. So when President Hakainde Hichilema comes into power, the major assets in this country, other than the ones owned by Barrick Gold and First Quantum in Northwestern Province, the major mining assets are in the hands of government. The decision to sell or give back to Vedanta, I think, was a contentious one. You saw the debate. Recently, Mopani was sold to a new investor from Dubai. Let me just give a brief background before I invite your comments. On KCM, President Hakainde Hichilema says we are not going to mine in courts. So he dropped the court cases. Similarly, under First Quantum, under Kansanshi, there were similar issues. So they dropped all those court cases and invited the investors to take full control. On KCM, there were issues of Vedanta, its viability, its standing currently internationally, and also its record of 20 years when it was here. On Mopani, an open process started. The Ministry of Mines announced through ZCMIH that they will hire a professional consultant, an international company, Rothschild, was hired, and another legal company, another law firm, I think, is it Case and something, were hired to deal with the sale of Mopani. Although many Zambians didn't agree that we should sell at all, but the decision was made by government. They advertised. They listed by May 2023 10 bidders who had expressed interest. By July, government announced that they had whittled down the list to 4 prospecting investors that had shown interest. By October, they said we are final, we are on the last lap. And in January, and the 4 bidders were announced, by the way. There were 2 Chinese firms, a South African firm, and a group by former Glencore professionals and miners who had formed a vehicle of their own. But in January, we were surprised. President Hakainde Hichilema and the Minister of Mines announced that they are the new interested party in Mopani. And they introduced this company from Dubai, International Resource Holdings. They claimed that it was a company that was affiliated, a subsidiary of a bigger company that all of us know, International Holdings Company. It's a well-reputed, well-known company. But the link between it and this International Resource Holdings is not really seen or known. And within a few weeks, we saw the ZCMIH apply to Lusaka Stock Exchange that they had this deal they were dealing with. They for an extraordinary AGM, which approved the deal, sale of 51% shares of this International Resource Holdings. The other details are that this investor pledged to invest $1.1 billion. He says he will use out of that $1.1 billion, he will use $400 million to liquidate the debt of Glencore, which was 1.5. It had come down to around $600 million, and they say they got a discount. The remainder of the $600 million, the investors said it has to go to investment in the mines to ramp up production. I'm bringing out all this background for your answer on 2 issues. The stakeholders, the opposition, civil society, have said, looking at the history of our country and state-owned enterprises, where we had 325 companies and someone just sold them like that under a whiff of privatization. These remaining assets, the 33 assets, will require that you go to Parliament and get a 2/3 majority. I think that is provided for under Article 210. Number two, the other matter of concern is that the investor, for the transfer of these shares, the 51%, there is no money coming in the treasury. Because the investor is saying, give me 51% shares, but this $620 million for the 51% shareholding is not coming to you. It is going to the mines. So people are saying, then what have we done? What have we sold? Because when we sell or transfer shares, I should get something in the kitty. Bring fresh investment to invest in the mines. So those are the two current debates, especially on Mopani. We don't need to go to Parliament in accordance with Article 210, Sub-Article 2. And then the other issues, I leave the boat to you.
That's fine. There are two things, right? The three events prior to Delta taking over majority interest in Mopani is something I cannot comment on because I've not looked at the documentation. Okay, and sometimes it's not good to rely on unverified information. I prefer to look at the information myself and make my own judgment. But I'll say about Mopani, I'll say it in two forms. On paper, as it stands, it is a fantastic deal. That's one thing that we have to acknowledge. It is a very, very good deal. Better than KCM, better than possibly any other deal that has been struck. That's one aspect. But unfortunately, that transaction is illegal. It's unconstitutional. Now, you raised the important issues about how this funding has to be managed and everything else. And I remember my sister Nawakwi was saying that the revenue from the sale of the shares should have gone to Control 99 and so forth. The point is this, and she was trying to run parallels between the previous
privatization program of the 90s.
Of the 90s and this one. This is completely different. There are no parallels there. Okay, because what has happened then, all these assets were owned by directly government or ZCCM. So they were sold as assets. Okay, so therefore it was government selling and receiving the money. What you have now, all these assets, if we take Mopani, for example, it was sold initially to Glencore, right? Then Glencore sold it back to government. Okay, government has now sold it back to Delta. Now, these are different kind of transactions. Okay, so the treatment and how the revenue is treated is completely different. Let me just explain on one thing. If the deal goes through and it is implemented as set out on paper, yes, it will revitalize Mopani, okay, which will be good for the country. And also it is about making sure, the implication is that by virtue of holding 49% of the shares, it will also mean that government will be able to, government, of course, through all these other, through ZCCMHI, IDC, and ultimately will be able to get whatever profit is made, 49% of that profit will have to go to government, theoretically. But there are a number of factors to take into account. First of all, let me explain about how the shareholder, it was so painful to watch the Minister of Mines to explain exactly what does.
The Minister of Mines sparked, in fact, international debate. He insisted that there was no sale of Mopani, and he said the transfer of shares. I'm trying to circumvent what you've called an illegality, Article 210, Sub-Article 2. He says, no, it was just transfer of shares.
Whatever happened, the outcome is what is the end result? Okay, so the end result, whichever way you look at it, it results in an illegality. Okay, Now, yes, it is a fantastic deal, but that does not authorize you to override the Constitution. It still remains illegal, even if it is a very sweet deal, okay? But it's still. And in any case, somebody was saying, but who is responsible? The parties to the transaction are all responsible to comply with the Constitution, including Delta itself. When you come to do business in any country, you are obliged to respect the laws of that country, including the Constitution of that particular country. And Article 1 is very clear. Any act or omission that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void. Yeah. It's as simple as that. What makes it illegal? Let's go back to unbundle it. First of all, what has transpired? We must first of all acknowledge, if we wind it back, when Glencore was moving out, there was already a debt of well in excess of $4 billion in the form of shareholder loans into Mopani. This was a huge burden. Then PF government negotiated that to 1.5 billion, and they provided for a mechanism for the repayment of that, which would
that's very, very important.
Yes.
Although the exit of Blanco didn't make business sense.
No.
But just invested, I think, in 2 new shafts.
Yes.
And that's a multi-billion-dollar investment.
That's right.
Just invested in a smelter and I think some form of refinery.
Yes.
So I think that's where you are talking about shareholder loans of up to $4 billion.
$4 billion.
So it's a well-invested asset.
It is. It is. So I think background information is always good. But unfortunately, we elected people who cannot even provide, who cannot digest these things and explain it to the people. So, okay, you have liability of 4 billion. It is reduced to 1.4 billion. Yeah. 1.5 is an attractive deal. And then they provided for repayment in the form of whatever
market rights.
Yeah, in terms of copper, that was going to be.
They took over the market rights.
That's right.
They'll determine how much they could give you back.
That's
very
as you liquidate now. But the problem is they left Mopani broke. They only left based on the sources that I've been able to establish, they only left $200,000 to run the mine when they were exiting. Now, how do you run a mine with $200,000? Okay, but I understand the management that remained there tried to gobble together some money to keep it running and so forth. But unfortunately, mining is an expensive venture. Okay, so what happened is that from the time they took off, government took over, Mopani has been operating at a loss. Okay, because it didn't.
So from 2020 to then,
it's been operating at a loss. And the loss has arisen from the fact that they have had no working capital. As a result, the debts have been going up. So what Mopani needed was cash injection in terms of working capital. So they now find, I'm not privy to all those people who did the bidding, but I'm just confining myself to the
knowledge you have.
Yeah, to the Delta deal. What is the structure of the Delta deal? The structure of the Delta deal is a good deal in the sense that as part of these negotiations, although the minister claimed that they paid off Glencore, that's not true. Okay, that's not correct. They didn't pay off Glencore, and that money didn't come from government. Out of the $1.4 billion that was agreed upon, they were able to negotiate with Glencore to bring their debt down from 1.4, because I think there was an attempt to service that loan. But I think they didn't make much dent into it. So they negotiated that debt from 1.4 to about $400 million. Okay, so already on the books of Mopani, that debt has shrunk. So what they've now done is that, by the way, for that $1.5 billion debt, all the assets of Mopani were mortgaged to Glencore.
Until the debt is cleared.
Until the debt is cleared. But with the new deal now, that debt of Glencore of 1.4 has been extinguished. Instead, Mopani now has a debt to Delta as a shareholder. So what has happened? Delta has stepped in the shoes of Glencore, having paid Glencore 400 million. So they negotiated that. So the assets of Mopani, all the assets actually mortgaged to Delta.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
By the way, you can actually, I mean, again, we don't read. This information is available at Bakra, by the way.
Oh.
Okay.
Tell us.
Yes. Based on the printout from Bakra, it clearly shows, for example, that right now, if you look at, there's an entry which is which reads 1st April.
Yeah.
2020, which
2024.
yeah, which no, 1st April 2021, there is this debt of 1.4 billion for Glencore. Now, if you check the Bakra record, it now says fully paid.
Wow.
When you now have Delta now, which have now registered their own mortgage, which was registered on 20th of March 2024, it is talking about almost 400 million, which is unpaid. That is one. That 400 million has come from that 1.4. So it's a good deal in the sense that you have extinguished a $1.4 billion debt to a $400 million.
But unfortunately, that means we've just transferred the asset from Glencore. Now they belong to Delta.
Now all the assets now belong to, they are now mortgaged to Delta. But so for Mopani, the liability has come down to 400 million. Now the way Delta has already paid Glencore in full. Now there's an interesting point. The question is, how can somebody accept to take a knock of
almost 1.1 billion?
1.1 billion. There is an agreement now involving Mopani and Glencore and the other parties where there is a royalty payment to be paid up to 2036. That is, in the event that the copper between now and 2036 is sold for $12,000
and above.
They'll get a royalty of 10%.
My God.
Okay.
So there's no discount.
Well,
Glencore will appear for them up to 2036.
Up to 2036. So in a month, if you sell your copper, because right now it's at about what, 8,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know what projection they have utilized. I have no idea. They expect that it will reach $12,000 a ton, and if it reaches that markup, there's a trigger. They'll get 10% royalty.
The criticism we've used to government giving away both KCM and Mopani, whatever the challenges, is that projection shows that the price of copper is just going to rise and rise. It's at $9,000 already. And just from 3 years ago, it jumped from somewhere around 6,000 to 9,000 to 10,000. 12,000, we are not far away from it. In fact, the projections from what I read, that prices will go as soon as possible to $20,000 per ton.
It's possible. But
so that means there is a price sharing mechanism with Glencore,
yes.
to 2036.
Up to 2036. But the beauty is that you are looking at a dead mine, which is not mining anything. Okay? So you can have 100% of zero, and but nothing is happening in Mopani. Now they are injecting. So the projection is that they expect that, I don't know what the current output of Mopani is. It is expected that in the next 3 years, they'll be able to ramp up production of Mopani to about 200,000 metric ton per annum, which would be quite a significant revenue. On the remainder of the money, what has happened is that out of that 620 million, now there is also some other liability in between involving some third-party creditors whom I think they have paid out about 180 million. There is that liability. But what is the real money that has been injected into, that will be injected into Mopani? That will be $620 million. Now, out of that, like you have rightly put it, Mopani did a lot of investment in terms of developing mining areas and for develop. Now, what they did was these things were stopped halfway. Some of them were 80% complete, 70% complete. They have done the projections, which shows that it will take about $400 million to finish those projects and increase the production. So there is that $400 million which will now be invested. But that $400 million will not be readily available. It will be given out in tranches. Because you're talking about for mine development, you won't need it at once. But as and when it is required, money will be made available. Then there is $200 million. This is what is now required as working capital. That is how the deal is structured. Now,
the criticism that government coffers have received nothing.
Yes. Now, here's the point. The question is, how and why was the deal structured this way? The issue is very simple. Who needs the money? The entity that needs money is Mopani. So Mopani had to find, because government doesn't have the money to inject Mopani. Government is broke. Okay?
Correct.
So Mopani had to find another way of raising that capital for money required for working capital, and also to complete the projects. So Mopani now had to raise that money
by selling its shares.
That's right. So now let's go and let's backtrack a little bit. When Glencore walked away, government owned 100% of the shares of
Mopani.
Yes, of course, through ZCCMHI. I will use ZCCMHI interchangeably with government because government is the ultimate beneficiary. It held 100% as a shareholder. Now, the point which is that government did not need money. Now, although it held that, by the way, Mopani in total has 200 million shares, okay, which its nominal capital is $200 million, which comprises 200 million shares divided of whose value is $1 each.
Okay.
Now, what they do, out of that 200 million, 6.9 million was issued to ZCCM. Okay? The rest were not issued. So, ZCCM held 100% of the issued share capital of Mopani. Now, those 9 million shares have remained with ZCCM-HI. Now, if Delta was to buy from that 6.9, then the money would have gone to ZCCM-HI. Okay? But ZCCM-HI didn't need the money. The entity that needs the money is Mopani. So therefore, for the 620 million, they said, okay, we want to have 51% of the shares of Mopani. We want to be the majority shareholder. So technically, Delta owns Mopani. Now, how do we achieve that? Two ways. They could have bought shares directly from ZCCM, but that would not have solved the problem. So what do? Remember, ZCCM is the only shareholder in Mopani. So ZCCM makes a decision to say Mopani should issue shares which will be equal to 51% of the issued share capital of Mopani. That is how Delta now ended up being given nearly 7.2 million shares. So ZCCM has 6.9 million and Delta has 7.2. This is how they structured it. Is it a sale or not? It is a sale. The only sale is between Delta and Mopani, in the sense that the money is going to Mopani because it is Mopani that needs the money. The technical word that is used in law is that Mopani allotted shares to Delta to excel because for $620 million, Delta has received 7.2 million shares. It is sell. Okay, although the minister was trying to say it's not a sale.
You are trying to educate us. You don't know what a subscription means. You don't know what
money has changed hands. There's a contract.
Shares of
yes. I need the money, which is my consideration, which is you need shares. I need the money. Consideration, there's an offer and acceptance.
Yes,
basic contract principle. You have the shares. The consideration from me as Mopani is shares. The consideration from you as Delta is cash. That's the transaction. Now, that is what the way it has been structured. Fantastic deal on paper. But it is important, before I move on to the legality of it, it is important that the key players keep an eye on this transaction to make sure that the parties act as expected. Because we have had experiences in the past whereby an investor comes in, promises to bring in money, and everything.
But that's an example.
Exactly.
It has signed $1.5 billion investment in KCM for 20 years.
Exactly. So, in this case, Mopani is in a healthier position than KCM, far much better. So we're talking about 400 million or so, and there is already, I understand, the 200 million, I think part of it has already been disbursed. By the way, it was actually disbursed by a local bank, Zanaco, anyway, the initial amount, of course, guaranteed by Delta. So
they bring in fresh money to you from your information, or they borrow from the local markets. I remember, for example, the sale of Zanaco from 51% shareholding, or was it 49? Where Rabobank from the Netherlands borrowed money from Interbank to pay for a transaction like this. So I hope that
I mean, that's not one and the same. The point is that a large chunk of the money which has been initially released came from Zanaco. Okay, so we don't know how they done it. It doesn't really matter how the money comes in. What is important is that money goes into Mopani. That is what is important.
Oh, it's important.
Yes.
If such an opportunity was given to local people,
yes,
where, for example, a local bank lends to them on a mine. So we seem to open these doors to foreign entities who we respect more, and we can put an outlay of $400 million for them. That can never happen to a local person. So to some extent it is.
Yeah, but well, I
don't want to disturb you.
As to whether government should be running businesses in the first place, I don't think that the government should be running businesses. Because the history of our parastatals clearly shows that government should not be running businesses. Okay. But anyway, coming back to the issue we're talking about, that is how it is structured. But ultimately, what is the effect? The effect is that we have transferred control or ownership of Mopani to Delta.
Both by shareholding and by assets, as you demonstrated.
That's what it means. So now let's remember, even before Glencore went out, right? ZCCM held about 10% of the shares. Right? So it was basically a minority shareholder. And at the end of the day, the person calling the shots was Glencore, not ZCCM. And even in this case, it is Delta calling the shots, not ZCCM HI, because they have 51%. The moment you go into the mine, you lose 50%. 50% of the shares are handed over to another entity. You have lost control. Okay, so there is a transfer. In any case, all those people that are talking about whether it was a sale or what, the Constitution talks also about a transfer.
Let's come to the issue of the Constitution. So, how is this transaction? You've demonstrated it is sweet, it's needed, it might revitalize the copper belt.
Yes.
And good governance. They didn't follow the
illegal in the sense that, you see, when you look at Article 120, 110, now, again, like many other provisions in the Constitution, they have a background. Okay. Now, the issue of constitutionalizing the disposal of government assets started with the Mungomba Constitution Commission. Now, by that time, we had already gone into, we had 15 years of privatization, and the results were horrendous in terms of how the entire process was done. So when it came up before the Constitution Commission, this issue was raised. Those that are interested can go and look at pages 721 of the Mungomba Constitutional Commission report, which was released in June of 2005. If you may indulge me, let me just read. I read what it says. It says here, the commission, this is the Constitution Commission, says, observes that the need for privatization gained momentum in the 1980s following the widespread disappointment with the general performance of state-owned enterprises. The Commission notes that most developing countries which are enthusiastically embrace state-owned enterprises reported less than satisfactory experiences with them. State-owned companies failed to perform for a variety of reasons, including application of inappropriate technology, dependence on processing of imported raw materials, inexperienced management, misappropriation of resources by officials appointed by governments to run them. I'm sure that disease should even be worse today now. Okay? These are the reasons why, when we are talking about this Zambian experience and so forth, and operation in monopolistic environments with no competition. The implication of this was that state-owned enterprises were typically potentially inefficient. This affected their financial viability, which in turn required that government subsidizes their operations. Thus, many countries saw privatization as a cure for public sector deficits. The Commission also observed that as an economic policy, privatization is not unique to Zambia, as many developing countries struggling to activate their battered and declining economies have either voluntarily or been forced to turn to privatization as a key economic policy for bringing about dynamic and sustainable. Let me jump here. Let's say, Commission notes that in Zambia, most of the privatized companies are sold cheaply, as the program was rushed and no accurate assessment of the values of these companies was undertaken. Much as it was well intended, privatization has had a negative social impact. It has resulted in the sale of most state-owned companies to mainly foreign buyers who have been unwilling to take on board most of the former employees of the enterprises which were sold. This has led to entrenchment, redundancies, and consequently massive unemployment in the country. Then they give the figures about how the labor force shrunk. And then they come to the case. In the case of Zambia Consolidated Copper Mines, some of the new owners failed to sustain the mining operations and opted to abandon the mines, or were forced to leave, leading to serious disruptions and distortions in the economy. This has continued. Okay, we had the experience of Anglo, we just worked out. Okay, so we have Glencore, which pulled out. So they now came. Some of the foreign investors who purchased state-owned enterprises were only interested in asset stripping. So we have a long history of these things. So these things don't just come from thin air. They're born out of history. And this is what the Commission said. In the light of the above consideration, the Commission agrees that government should seek the approval of Parliament, okay, before the sale, transfer, or disposal of major assets, including parastatal companies. In this regard, the Commission feels that it is government's obligation to provide certain services, such as they're talking about, to provide certain services such as energy, communication, banking, health, to mention but a few to the public, which would otherwise not be provided if the company is currently providing such services when private hands. So there's a suggestion that a line of certain economic activities should be undertaken by government. This is the recommendation. The commission, this is 2005 we're talking about.
Yeah.
The commission recommends that the constitution should provide that any measure to sell, transfer, or dispose of major public assets such as parastatus shall require approval of the National Assembly through a resolution supported by not less than 2/3 of the MPs.
Wow. This is 2005. Zambians are concerned. And they're saying any sale of any assets, transfer of shares, whatever, go back to Parliament.
Go back to Parliament, whatever happens. Then, when the President Sata appointed a technical committee, the technical committee also came up with the same conclusion. Now, in the Mungomba Constitution Commission, they introduced the Article 315 in the draft constitution, which says any major asset, such as a parastatal company or a commercial enterprise of the state, shall not be sold or transferred or disposed of except with the prior resolution of the National Assembly supported by a vote of not less than 2/3 of all the members of the National Assembly.
The Mopani sale falls in this category.
It falls in this category because what has happened is this. Government owns this entity 100%. What has happened? It has transferred that. Okay? That company is technically owned by another company. Okay? What is the difference between 49% and 10%? There's no difference. You're still a minority shareholder anyway. Okay? The one with 51% controls. And in fact, that is exactly what is happening on the ground anyway in Mopani. And if you go find out further, you will actually discover that, in fact, there is actually a parallel management which has been introduced, Mopani. Whereas you have the existing management, Delta has brought
It's on people who own the assets now.
Exactly. But obviously they are concerned. So a deal like this required government approval of the National Assembly. There is another point which people seem to ignore, which is the fact that, you see, when you have a license, okay, there is a provision under the Mines and Minerals Development Act, right? First, when you have a license, the way Mopani has, you cannot undertake any reorganization internally which will result in a new person having more than 50% of the shares without a ministerial approval. Okay? This is contained in Section 67 of the Mines and Minerals Development Act. It says, a holder of a mining right or mineral processing license shall not, after the date of the grant of the license, without the prior written approval of the minister, register the transfer of any shares or of any share or shares in the company to any person or that person nominee, if the effect of doing so will give that person control of the company.
So the license can't be sought without the approval of the ministry.
This, Kabuswe, granted this permission. Why? Because they recognize that there is now a transfer. A new person is going to control this mine. ZCCM was going to lose control over Mopani. This particular provision was complied with. Okay? Or there's another scenario, or enter into an agreement with any person if the effect of doing so would give the person control. What is control? It says here, for purposes of this section, a person is deemed to have control of a company if that person or that person's nominee or either person or that person's nominee together have a total of 50% or more of the equity shares of the company.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't say
council, the law, state council, the law is very clear.
the law is fine.
You need minister's approval.
Yes, maybe that's
but you need 2/3 majority in Parliament.
Yes.
You can't bypass that.
You can't bypass, and the rationale is very simple. That is why, for example, we have too many questions about this transaction. Okay? There were other people, for example, that you have referred to. Now, members of parliament needed to understand, how did you end up with Delta?
Yeah, why have you abandoned?
Why abandoned?
Sangwa water and
Yes.
these others?
Yes.
Whereas international resource holdings, which now register Delta,
Yes.
come from, constitutes this local Delta. There's a local shareholder. Who are they?
Who are they? And all these things is designed for purposes of transparency.
Yeah.
Okay? So that, because at the end of the day, look at this saga with KCM. We're suffering. The Zambians that are suffering. Okay? Now, these assets are supposed to benefit the people. And the best way to do it is to say, what is the rationale behind taking the issue to the National Assembly? Because this is where the people's representatives, MPs, represent the people in their respective constituencies. And you would have expected the MPs on the Copper Belt and Northwestern Province to lead the matter to be part of this discussion, because these mines exist in their constituencies, so that they have an input, so that they know how Delta has ended up being the selected entity to take
successful bidder.
All these things, you know what? They are necessary for purposes of. It could be that this is a clean deal. We don't know that. Okay, but also don't
State
forget.
Council. In fact, this brings me to this question. Every time we raise these concerns, in the manner you've expressed them, and you've expressed them in a more lucid manner than any of us, I think, have done, the concerns around the Constitution. Is this illegality very serious? The breach of the Constitution? Is it an infraction we can ignore because the deal is good?
No, you can't. You see, here is a problem. If I may just, if the Article 210, it says, subject to approval. It's not ratification, but approval. So before you complete this deal, they have to approve. You need to have approval of the National Assembly. Okay? Now, it's only when you have approval, that's when you complete. It's different from ratification. Ratification you can conclude.
And it just comes later.
Okay?
In this case, it's approval.
It's approval. You have to do it. These are what we would call condition precedents. You should have obtained parliamentary approval before concluding this deal.
Okay.
Now, there is a constitutional omission. Now, Article 1 clearly says that any act or omission that contravenes the Constitution, that act, it says, if I may just read it expressly, it says, Article 1(2) says, an act or omission that contravenes this Constitution is illegal. Full stop. No matter how sweet the deal is, no matter how much it favors the people of Equal and Venezuela, it is illegal. Now, there is a problem with this. Delta should have ensured that before they concluded, comply with the constitutional provisions.
Do the state risk taken over by government because of this provision?
Ambassador, yes.
If you got a new government, for example,
yes, they can say this is an illegal contract.
Okay.
Now, the reason why there is always need, even if you are in doubt, wisdom will dictate to say, you know what, let's err on the side of caution. Let's go to National Assembly. You have no problem. Okay? It's better to do that.
These are malicious.
No, they would not have refused.
Yeah.
Nobody can tank a deal like this. It's a fantastic deal. What is beyond comprehension is why they didn't take it to the National Assembly. And even when you ask them to explain, for some reason, they can't even explain it. What is even worse, the London Attorney General is asked, they said, this deal is illegal. He says, no, it's not illegal, it's okay, but if you have a problem, go to court. No, that is again not understanding your role as an Attorney General. An Attorney General, you are not a cadre. You are Attorney General for the Republic of Zambia. What the Attorney General needed to do was to explain why, in his opinion, there was no requirement to take the issue to the National Assembly. We could have had a debate on that.
We have